seen a blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby? Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there, somewhere.
Well, hello and welcome. Today has turned out to be an eventful day. This program, I suppose, is a special broadcast that Dr. Pidgeon and myself are bringing to you. I have to thank Matthew, who's in the scenes at the back, being our moderator and helping out at the very last minute. He is the pinnacle to all the work we're doing here at the moment, along with Stuart, who is a long-term moderator, Stuart Birch. But you know, this program, it is impromptu, but sometimes that's the leading of the Ruach, and that's how it goes. So, you know, we're just going completely led and accountable to the Ruach HaKodesh for him to be involved in here today and to come in to this meeting, into this place. And, you know, I haven't advertised it. It's lovely to see people joining here. Thank you for your faithfulness. We really do appreciate you here. So as much as possible, I will try adding in your comments, or Matthew, if you're able to do that, you can. So look, this is what I want to speak to you about. Now, you guys, you joined us last Monday when we had a special broadcast with Dr. Stephen Pidgeon and Zen Garcia. And that was just absolutely phenomenal. It was just, to me, I really enjoyed hearing about it. You know, Zen called me and said, we're going to speak about the vestures of light and the rod of wonder. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I knew he had confidence in Dr. Pidgeon, and together, obviously, they study this. This is what they've put their whole life into. So they were able to bring so much to the table. Afterwards, Zen sent me the information, and we've come to an agreement now that when we do these programs, he'll send me the information beforehand so that I can get involved. But I've just absolutely been bowled over with what this new book of his, I don't know how old it is, but it is called The Vestures of Light and the Rod of Wonder, because it's not just historic. It doesn't just go into the extra biblical books, Jasher and Jubilees, I believe, but it brings into context where we are now. It brings into context the seed war. It brings into context the bloodline, the more than the Genesis narrative that we are used to. And it shows you where our future is and where it's going. It makes you understand things that no one dare ask when it comes to the Genesis narrative, to the Genesis story, to the first few chapters of Genesis, you know, the fall of man, what Christendom has just goes beyond. You have a certain text, a certain script, and they dare not touch beyond that. I'm working with Stephen now for a year and coming into relationship with people like Zen and us compiling and working together. It's taught me to dare, to be courageous and test things where before you were too fearful to tread, but to weigh it up. You know, what I found is this concept of the Genesis narrative is far more, just besides the war in heaven, to do with the fall of humanity. What intrigued me was that this was to do with the temptation from Hasatan to Adam and Eve. Now, that's not new to any of us, but that's what led to them losing their bright nature, which is the terms that both Stephen and Zen got me particularly used to, from the removal from the first estate and the eventual incarnation into human embodiment. Now, that has never been touched before. People have been too afraid in Christendom, the shepherds, to touch that. They won't. So that's intrigued. And I'm really interested to hear what Stephen can say on that. So if there was no fall of humanity, what does that mean? Would we be in human embodiment, or would we be more like unto Yahuwah as we were supposed to be, unto Yahusha in his image? I'm really interested. I'm only at the beginning of my study, but this is a impromptu program, and I'm sure it is. I know it's led by the Ruach, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Stephen on that. in that particular area. But this displacement, because that's what it is a displacement, and it's a backdrop to a wonderful story. And this is real. It's not a story, of course. It's in the Bible, and the Bible is truthful, and it's the word. But it's about that immaculate conception, born of a virgin. Yahusha was a mortal embodiment, a fresh form of a child coming to replace what Adam had done, had failed in his lineage. And the fresh revigoration of that was something so important to me that really brought home last Monday his death, his resurrection. It brought into concept the fall between and the fight between the angel and humanity. And as the gentleman was saying, this term ratification, putting something right, salvation that we call unto to this day, that is required until Yahushua returns, that we stand as those ambassadors. But it gives you a greater appreciation of Yahushua, the price that he paid, the price on the cross, in concept of this whole narrative here, of this whole story. So the consequences of Eve, her eating from the tree, that knowledge of good and evil, it doesn't stop there. It's the interpretation. It's how we take this further, how we look into it, what it corresponds to, because there was a chastising. That's what Genesis 3 reads. It's all about a chastising. Genesis 3 verses 14 to 17. I actually, day before yesterday, was summarizing it because I wanted to get a better understanding of it rather than reading it verse by verse and just getting the particular points that are important. So Yahuwah Elohim, starting in verse 14, said to the serpent, because you have done this, you have cursed above all, you are cursed above all cattle, above the beast of the field, upon your belly you shall go. So to the serpent, this is his curse. This is what Yahushua has said to him. That stood out to me. It's not that I didn't know this. I just wanted to articulate it. I wanted to put it into context for myself. Then verse 15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, and it shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. I'm at the beginning of this discovery here to understand what that means. I know that it is significant for our times. And again, apart from this embodiment that we took form of because of the fall, what does that mean? What are the implications? I hope as Dr. P is listening to what I'm saying, he can even bring some more credence and fluency to what I'm introducing here, because so many of us are asking questions that we've been silenced to ask before. And that's the beauty of today. And that's the beauty of a study like this. Verse 16, unto the woman, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In conception, in sorrow you shall bring forth children. Man shall rule over you. Well, I had a few questions there. One, being a mother of 3, I know the pain that is involved in childbirth. So that's saying, had it not been for what had happened, it would have been a different type of experience. And I can understand that. Yet it is still so beautiful to give birth and to your own children. And we still, through the Ruach, have the ability to sustain that excruciating pain. But it's interesting that it says, man shall rule over you. So had things been different, then maybe this wouldn't have been brought into the equation. To me, I'm not a feminist and I don't consider things like this, but it's just something that I want to understand every area that is over here that we're looking into. And verse 17, to Adam, because you hearken to the voice of the woman and eaten to the tree of which I commanded you not to, cursed is the ground for your sake. In sorrow shall you eat of all the days of your life. I'm really intrigued. I want to study that more. I want to understand what that means. I'm not talking just about tilling in the ground and the harvest seasons and sometimes not having a harvest. I really feel that there is more to that, and that it is important for us to know, and for the remnant, that we can live in a different way if we know and if we understand and if we position ourselves. Both Stephen, both Zen, last week, they were looking at they were examining, and they only did it in brevity. They didn't do it in great detail. The Hebrew words connected to the actions, the consequences mentioned in the fall, with what they done, the reality of what happened. And really what they brought out and what's instigated this talk today is that it has brought out the truth of what happened in the garden and what that means for us today. Now, this was a new concept. Again, something that dare no one else to tread. They spoke about the garments of power, the rod of wonder. They began to introduce how that relates to the 10 king prophecy. And, in time, I'll be able to come back with more. I know here Stephen can add to that already. And it just excites you in your spirit and gets you wanting to it puts a hook in your jaw that you want more, and you want more. Embodied again, as I said, about the birth of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. They're all interconnected. And I know Stephen can give some more ground to that here today, but I, on this journey, really want to know, what is that connection between this rod of wonder, this garment of power, the prophecy to the 10 kings, the embodied birth of the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent? There's more to this, and I think it's critical that we understand how to navigate this. Genesis 3:15 says, enmity plays out between the two bloodlines, which I know I've said before, but it's a point worth reinforcing, because we have to correctly interpret the fall of humanity. And I think we've not been thought correctly. Why? Because the shepherds don't know it themselves. They only teach the script that they've been given, but they never go deep. They never look into the complexity of it. And there is so much more to this. It's not just this is the origin of sin. There's so much more that we have to delve into, and we must not be afraid. What this does, I've discovered, especially since last week with just talking briefly with Stephen and Zen, it builds conviction in you, and it makes you stand strong and stand staunch, that those convictions become so solid. It forms something in your spirituality, in your prayer life, and it just in your study and how you speak, in being a warrior, in understanding these times, in fighting and standing stronger. I'm intrigued. Now, I know just a few weeks ago, even Stephen's done a program where he's looked at the beguilement to do with Cain, and it's just power packed. And, for me, just fire so much that I want to look into. This beguilement is defined, if I'm pronouncing it right, as Nasha, Nasha, and in Greek as aspatio, which means wholly seduced, as verified in Paul's writings, where he reflects the serpent's beguilement in 2 Corinthians, meaning it was a complete act of beguilement, of seduction. Verse 2 in here in 2 Corinthians, for I am jealous over you with a righteous jealousy, for I have espoused you to one man, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Mashiach. Verse 3, but I fear, lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through her subtlety, that her mind should be corrupted for the simplicity that is in Mashiach. That is quite intriguing, talking about the anointed one, that it was a physical seduction that Eve went through, which resulted in the birth of Cain. Yes, we know that, but did we know that it was from Hasatan, from the snake, from that side of things? No, many people will not be exposed to that. So this is a completely new area to look into, looking into the greater meaning of the wheat and the tares. Matthew 13 as the children of the enemy. How powerful is that? The parable of the weeds, 24 all the way to 30, how it's explained. There is so much dynamic there. And you often hear this is the tares, but now we're beginning to find out what that is. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stop there. I can come back and I can add to this, because I think I've given several points that Dr. P can expound on already. And then we can go into the parable of the sower and the seeds. I understand, and I just love this revelation of the parable like I have never comprehended before. And that is the beauty of learning the word and coming into such revelation. Stephen, welcome back.
Well, hi, Jessica. How are you?
Okay. We're just, well, it's good. I can really sense the ruach in this actually, and just, going by what the lead is. And we've had an opportunity now to share something that is coming a passion on my heart, and I'm beginning to understand an area of your research and the beat that you've had for so long, and the fact that this actually answers questions. That I love to understand the end times and how that affects us now, and that this has a place in it. It really pumps me, and is important for our viewers to have that same understanding, because we're walking this together. So it's a privilege to do this program with you.
Oh, outstanding. Well, let's start with, we have some very interesting anomalies that appear in the book of Genesis. And it begins in really the very first chapter. And it has to do with like Genesis 1:26, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's see if I can find it here. When he says, when Elohim says, let us make man in our image and likeness. Let us make man in our image and likeness. And I can tell you that is exactly how it is read in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, you've got very interesting words in the Ivri, because there's no question that they're plural. And so that when they're plural, you're saying, okay, let us make man in our image. And so he made man in his image. He created them, male and female. He created them. Well, male and female, he created them. Well, the term there is zakar and nekaba. Now, this is different than what we see with the creation of Adam. And in Genesis 2, we also see a different anomaly in Genesis 2, because in Genesis 2, he creates man before the plants and the trees. So if the plants and the trees are created on the third day, then man had to be created on the second day. Well, in Genesis 1, it says man was created on the sixth day. And this has to do with, I think this is where many students of this scripture have come to agree, that there's two separate creations going on here. Now, with the two separate creations happening, you have something that's very interesting in that idea, because, a lot of people think, well, if there was a creation before Adam, then that must have been going back to time immemorial. That must have gone back millions and millions of years. Well, I don't think so. I think you can see very clearly in the language in Genesis 1 that there were 7 days of creation, 6 days of creation, and the seventh day of rest. And because of that, remember, a day to Yah is 1,000 years. So this appears to tell you that there was a 7,000-year epoch before Adam was created on the second day in the second epoch. Now, if if we can agree that is the case, then we have something very unusual going on. Because now we see that the created Zakar and Nekeba are creatures of Elohim, who said, let us create man in our image. Let us create man in our image. And so you might describe them as the Beni Elohim, the sons of Elohim, or the children of Elohim, as compared to Adam and Hua, who are described as Ish and Isha. Now, Ish is an interesting word for man, and Isha an interesting word for woman. And believe me, the two are mutually independent of each other. But what you see with those words, they both also mean fire.
Fire.
So you can see that they were children of, let's call it children of a strange fire, if you will, or children of an unknown fire. Not the kind of fire that you would expect if you're lighting logs and you're watching burn, or you're lighting leaves or something like this, or paper and you're watching it burn, but a different kind of fire, a kind of electric fire, if you will, the kind of fire that was in the burning bush, where the bush was glowing like it was on fire, but yet it was not being consumed. This same kind of, children of light, if you will. And so in this creation of being children of light, you see this in the testimony of many, many people talking about how they have visions of the throne, or other testimonies where they have seen, where the heavenly being they're seeing is a being of light, and suddenly the light comes down and there's a person there, and then the light goes back up. And I think this is part of the context of what we would call the glorified body, the glorified body, the
Right.
glorified body that cannot be killed in Revelation is talked about, and that this glorified body has to do with this being a creature of light. And of course, when the creature fell, when Hua ate from the tree, and Adam joined her, the light disappeared. And when the light disappeared, they saw they were naked. You see.
Right.
So
Okay.
now, oh, wait a minute, the light's gone. Boom. Well, we're naked. Well, now what? Well, I don't know, because we used to be covered with light. Now what do we do? I don't know. Get some fig leaves, And the
Mm.
fig leaves are, of course, a metaphor for governance, right? Let us establish governance over what we're going to do. And Yah says, no, I'll clothe you with skins, right? And
Skin.
go ahead.
So flesh. You're talking about flesh,
Flesh.
skins.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Like
that's,
flesh.
I don't want to take your train away, but I do want you to come back to the fact that how I started with this, if it were not for the fall, it seems that we wouldn't have skins, flesh, embodiment. So what does that mean, if I'm understanding it correctly?
No, we would. And I think there's many scriptures that indicate that man was going to propagate and create more children, notwithstanding the fall. And the difference, but there is something very curious here, though, because when you look at the Beni Elohim, they may not have had the fall in their creation. Now, let's take the Beni Elohim for as it's written in Genesis 1, that you see mankind, Zakar and Nekaba, created on the sixth day. So if they're created on the sixth day, then they have 1,000 years of living before the 7 year, the seventh year, or the 7,000th year rest. So they're around for 2,000 years. Then there's another 1,000 years of creation before mankind is created on the second day. So this prior mankind, the Beni Elohim, have been on earth for 3,000 years before Adam and Hua are placed in the garden. Now, what's the condition of the earth at this time? This is an antediluvian world, a pre-flood world. What did the pre-flood world look like? Well, I don't know, because you've got a number of anomalies going on here. Number one, Adam and Hua were placed in a garden. That is to say, they were placed in an ecosystem that was a discrete and finite ecosystem. It was a discrete ecosystem, the garden. They're placed in this garden, and you can eat anything you want, but don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Whereas the Beni Elohim were on the planet elsewhere and everywhere. And so the Beni Elohim, it's my suspicion that the Beni Elohim suffered a catastrophe coming into the creation of Adam. So that there was a catastrophe on the earth that maybe they were expected to survive, maybe they weren't expected to survive. But I think that catastrophe on earth is the battle that's described in heaven. So you have a battle that's described, and the battle is told, we're told that these Beni Elohim were created, and there was a falling, there was a fallout. A third became possessed with themselves and decided that they were going to rule their own lives. There was a fallout, and then there was a battle. And in this battle, what happened? Well, again, you have a very interesting record when you talk about, for instance, the Hindu record and some of the other records, talking about that there was even, and could have been even, a nuclear war that took place on Earth prior to the creation of Adam. Prior to the creation of Adam. So when we look at this now, I watched a very interesting video earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday. I watched it concerning the pyramids, and this author was posturing the idea that the Egyptians did not build the pyramids at all, but rather that they inherited the pyramids. They inherited the pyramids, and that the pyramids are exact in so many different ways. It's just unbelievable how they were built, and what they project and what they say. And so with these pyramids, and here's the bottom line, Jesse, the pyramids were most likely a battery. They were a battery.
Yeah.
They were not necessarily an electric generation plant, but they had electricity stored there, and they had an enormous amount of electricity stored there, and they were a battery and capable of transmitting that electricity. So when you look at Nikola Tesla tried to design this and tried to harness the same thing, which is essentially this. There is an enormous amount of electricity in the air, power of the earth. Now, for the people who think that the earth is flat, this is a problem for them, because Tesla's theory has to do with the fact that the rotation of the earth in itself very much operates like an electric stator. So if you know anything about an electric stator, this is what you call a generator or an alternator. So let me just give you a quick briefing on what that looks like. So with a stator, you have inside the stator, you have a thing that turns, and the contact is made with metal with things called brushes. Now, they're not really brushes, but we call them brushes, and they brush up against the metal. Now, the metal is wrapped with massive amounts of copper that go in between these segments of metal. And so as a result, they create what's called a magneto. And so the brushes are going around, and because of the circular motion, they generate electricity. And some of these stators generate 20,000 volts, right? I mean, you're talking about some, you can move some pretty big voltage. In fact, the whole theory behind Tesla cars is inherent to how a stator functions, okay? Because that's how they're run. Those cars are run on stators. So the Earth is kind of a giant stator in that it's rotating around, and it's rotating around inside an atmosphere. Because it's rotating around inside an atmosphere, the atmosphere is charged. It's charged, and it has an enormous amount of electricity. Now, Tesla knew this. And when he told DuPont that this electricity was free for the taking, DuPont said, "You're out of work because I intend to charge for this."
That's right.
Right? So we're done with you, Tesla. Goodbye. Go eat some cat food. We're done talking to you. So Tesla had demonstrated how this was done. So the question is, did the pyramids have the capability and to literally pull energy out of the air and to store the energy in those gigantic blocks of limestone as a battery? That is to say, the pyramid itself, the whole pyramid was a battery.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is just outstanding. So when you see that, then now the next question is these ley lines that are developed between the pyramids. We know that there's pyramids, for instance. Well, I shouldn't say we know, but it is understood that there are pyramids, for instance, in Sarajevo, in what used to be Yugoslavia. It's in the Bosnia-Herzegovina. And there you have pyramids. There's pyramids in the Crimean Peninsula. There's pyramids up at Archangel in Russia. There's even rumor of a pyramid in Alaska. There's pyramids in Mexico. The Mayans and the Incas and so on built all these things, right?
Yeah.
And many of them are connected with what they call ley lines. And
so ley lines is flat. So what do you mean? I know what you're saying about the pyramid, but ley lines, in my understanding, is what's flat to the ground.
Well, no, it's just a straight flat line that hovers over the top of the earth.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. John Hallam has some very interesting information on a ley line connecting all of the temples of St. Michael, or the Archangel Michael. And these go from some obscure island off the coast of Ireland all the way to Jerusalem. And they're in a direct line. They're in a straight line all the way, well, actually to Haifa. It's in a straight line all the way to Haifa. And they were built in different years, built in different centuries even. Yet, and they didn't even know about the location of other places, but they're built along a long ley line. And we also see ley lines. There's another place, most people don't know about it, but I'll tell you about it. In northwestern Australia, at the far northwestern corner of Australia, there is a HAARP array, a high atmosphere antenna array that is built at the far northwestern corner of Australia in the shape of the Star of David. In the shape of the Star of David. And it has ley lines that connect directly to Astana in Uzbekistan, and that connect directly to the nuclear power plant in Southern California. I mean, they're direct. I mean, the lines are just like right there, boom, boom, all across the ocean, across continents. And it's a direct lineup across these ley lines. Okay.
Yeah.
With that being said, So by having these ley lines in the world, it was possible then to develop machinery that could use electric motors, again, a stator, to even do things like fly.
Yeah.
So, for instance, somebody was talking about on the Radio Free Alaska chat. Somebody was talking about Nazca lines that they have found a glyph that shows the Nazca lines that were found in the Peruvian desert. Now, these lines indicate that there was some kind of aircraft landing, and the same thing in the United States. There were aircraft landing. These were landing sites. What aircraft? And how could they fly? I mean, there doesn't appear to be any use of petroleum products prior to the flood. They were using electricity, and they were using electricity that was freely available because it was being broadcast over the earth in a grid of ley lines, pyramid to pyramid, the pyramids being massive batteries storing the electricity.
Yeah.
And I think the key to these batteries, the key to this pyramid, and the key to these batteries functioning was a consistent frequency, that was humming, so that when the pyramid was filled with certain kinds of water, and I'm not sure if it was monatomic water or what kind of water it was, but there was water being filled in the pyramid, and then the pyramid would be brought to a hum, and at a specific frequency, it would generate. And again, I'm speculating. Okay, I don't know the science on this, but at that specific frequency, it would begin to pull the energy from the sky into the pyramid, where it would be stored in these massive blocks of lime.
Yeah.
So, you talk about, like, for instance, well, anyway, I'm not going to get too far afield on it, but let's just say that this technology is emerging as we speak today, because as it was in the times of Noah, so it will be in the times of the coming of the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, you can see now that we have this idea that there was a line called the Beni Elohim that had 3,000 years of existence on earth prior to Adam and Hua being cast from the garden. And Adam and Hua being cast from the garden, when you talk about the curse that comes on with them being cast from the garden, I think you had a situation going where the earth, generally speaking, was kind of okay. But because of this cataclysm that had happened, and then Adam and Hua being cast from the garden, they're cast out into a place where the earth is not okay now. Cursed is the ground for your sake.
Okay, so you've already given me an understanding of one of the questions that I was asking at the beginning. Brilliant.
Yeah, so we look at cursed at the ground. So here's what they come out into the ground, and it's like, well, wait a minute. You're going to have to farm from this ground, and it isn't going to be easy. You're by the sweat of your brow, and you're going to get thorns and thistles. So this is very interesting, because in the book of Jasher, it tells us that in those days, they didn't farm very much because the ground didn't yield very much, which means what? They were hunting animals. You see, this was the whole business of Yah giving them skins. Okay, I'm going to give you skin to wear. You're giving us skins. That came from an animal. If it came from an animal, this means that the hunt is on, right? Now you're going to have to live by hunting these animals. So these guys were, hardcore on the carnivore diet, if you will. Nothing to eat all the time, right? And so there was very little that was planted. So they were called hunter-gatherers. And this is the kind of the nature of the things, that they would be a hunter-gathering society. Even though they would build cities, farming was so difficult. It was very, very difficult to farm. So you would see farming now only spring up in very fertile valleys where there were intense rivers: Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, Indus River. And remember that probably prior to the flood, and probably prior to Adam, we had this place called Atlantis, which appears now to have been located in the Western Sahara Desert. And that there was a massive river that connected Atlantis to the Mediterranean Sea, huge river, and that they were actually surrounded by water. And in addition to that, they were in gold mines. So the area around them was really covered with gold. And to this day, there's plenty of gold in the nation of Mali, where this Situs of Atlantis was located. But this city was completely destroyed in whatever it was, whatever the catastrophe was that occurred that took them down. Now, it's possible that the catastrophe that brought them down was, everybody wants to speculate, well, it was an asteroid. An asteroid hit the Earth, or a major meteor hit the Earth, or a meteor shower, or a comet scorched it. Maybe, but maybe it was the destroyer. Maybe it was the destroyer. Now, when we talk about the destroyer, we know in subatomic particle physics, for instance, that you can have an atom that has rogue electrons. That is, for instance, if you look at U-235, which is an unstable isotope, you have electrons that are in inordinate orbit because the atom is trying to pull free electrons from somebody else to bring it back to U-238. And so you have this inordinate stuff that's going on with the outer electrons that are doing weird things in their orbit. If this is the case, and we have a similar pattern inside the solar system, we could have a rogue planet that is in some kind of a massive elliptical orbit that is very broad. Gil Broussard speculates that it's got a 360-year orbit. And it's a highly unusual rogue orbit and elliptical to the sun and so forth. And the Colburn Bible discusses the visit of this destroyer at the time of Moshe, and that this destroyer is what caused, or was the scientific cause, if you will, to the 10 plagues that rose. Now, we know that Yah uses things like science, what we would call science. He uses physical things on the earth and uses armies and people to accomplish his will. For instance, when he judged Jerusalem, he used Nebuchadnezzar to do that.
Yes.
He didn't come down with a thunderbolt and say, boom, everybody's blown up like he did at Sodom and Gomorrah. No, he used people to accomplish his will. And he's using people right now to accomplish his will.
Mm-hmm.
But the destroyer, on the other hand, was a physical apparition. I mean, assuming that the narrative in the Koel book portion of the Colburn is the narrative, then we have a description of the destroyer. Now, this is not the only time that we have a description of the destroyer. We have descriptions elsewhere and in other histories throughout the world. So if it was a destroyer that visited, whatever it was, cursed the ground. And when it cursed the ground, you can see, you provided a fruit tree that lived in a cave, which was given gifts by rod of wonder, So here we see that what takes place is that with the ground being cursed, this curse is going to come to an end with the flood. This is why you can say that Yah was punishing the earth with the flood, but he was restoring the earth with the flood. I have cursed the ground because of the sin of Adam and Hua. But then he repents from this curse and he restores the earth through the flood. And the earth is green again all over the earth. Now, it's not as green as it was in the Garden of Eden, but it's green nonetheless. And mankind has the ability now to plant, to farm, to harvest fruit trees, to plant olive vineyards, so on and so forth. And the curse of the ground is lifted. Now, with the rod that comes through, now this rod is so interesting because I'll tell you, Zen was demonstrating a discussion of the rod and the textual support for the rod being, with the rod being, in the hands of everybody and their brother, coming all the way from Adam through Abraham and through Abraham to Yitzhak and Yaakov, and from Yitzhak and Yaakov to Yasharel to Joseph. Now, this is an important thing. You see, Yasharel in Genesis 49, he tells Judah, the scepter shall be in your hand and the lawgiver between your feet. But he had given the rod to Yosef. So Yosef's authority expressed over Egypt is expressed in this rod. Now, interestingly enough, you see that there were sorcerers and magicians in the king's court. Now, who was in the Pharaoh's court at that time? Well, there was Balaam, who was the father of Jannes and Jambres. There was Job, he was there, who was the one that suggested that they put no straw in the bricks. And there was Jethro, Moshe's father-in-law. And Moshe's father-in-law is the one who steals the rod of Joseph and takes it out to his flocks in Midian. Very fascinating stuff. And so Moshe would grab the rod. Now, the discussion is that the rod had the name of Yod He Vav He. It had the name of Yahweh on the rod. The rod that exists in Birmingham, that they claim to be Moshe's rod that's in the Birmingham Museum, this rod has Egyptian hieroglyphics on it. So was the name Yahweh encoded in hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics?
Right.
Now, if this is the case, thanks to the work of Ross Broadstock, we're going to be able to show that. Because we can use his book, Cumroglyphics, to decipher the petroglyphs or the hieroglyphs that are featured on Moshe's rod and figure out what it says. And so, at any rate, with Moshe's rod, you see something interesting. Now, Moshe's rod, I think, is distinguishable from Aaron's rod.
Mm-hmm.
But Zen makes a very good point in his book, and I think it's a very critical point, that when you're talking about, Moshe said, okay, Yah tells Moshe, throw down your staff, and it became a serpent. Well, what kind of serpent? Most likely a cobra. It wasn't a little tiny adder. It wasn't a rattlesnake. It was a cobra. Most likely. And he reaches down and grabs it by the tail, and it becomes a staff again. But when Aharon threw Aaron's staff down, it became a dragon.
Yeah.
And Zen makes the point. He says, look, when this rod became a dragon, it wasn't just any dragon. It was a monstrously huge dragon in the court of Pharaoh, that when the magicians threw their staff down to form dragons, that dragon went chomp, chomp, and they were gone.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't swallow them the hard way. He swallowed them up. They were gone. Boom, boom. Just like that. Bam.
Yeah.
So this rod of Aharon performed this function only in the hands of Aharon and in no one else. But the interesting side of that rod was that rod bloomed. It bloomed all the leaves. Okay. Now, it was not Moshe's rod that was kept in the Ark of the Covenant. It was Aaron's rod that was kept in the Ark of the Covenant. So what happened to Moshe's rod? Well, passed down, passed down, passed down. However, when we get to David, we have something curious that happens. Remember, David had control of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
For him, the Ark of the Covenant was a big deal. I don't know what it was to Shaul, but to David, the Ark of the Covenant was huge. And he moved it from Shiloh in the tent where it was, which, by the way, the tent of meeting and all of that, there was a specific purpose for that tent. That tent was built in such a way to do what? Allow the ark to generate massive amounts of electricity. Massive amounts. Probably 100,000 volts was coming in from the friction of those animal skins over the top of the ark, with two cherubim with solid gold wings pointed at one another, and a solid gold top, and probably an interior that was filled with gold dust, monatomic gold. So as a consequence, this thing would generate massive amounts of electricity. Now think about this, Jesse. If you're told, Moses told Aaron, don't you dare walk into that Holy of Holies wearing something made of wool. Don't even think about doing it. And whatever you do, don't mix any wool with the linen either, because one spark and you're going to get 100,000 volts and fry right there.
Conductor. Yeah.
So he didn't do it. So in they go. And anyway, so here's the Ark of the Covenant. And David says, I'm going to take the Ark of the Covenant out of the tent of meeting. It's going to lose its voltage property, and we're going to put it in a temple in Jerusalem. And when he did, guess what? When Solomon opens up the Ark of the Covenant, he doesn't find the rod of Aharon. Why not? Psalm 23. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You see, David had taken the rod of Aharon. Now, again, this is something that the Roman church is going to edit out of the New Testament. Eusebius, leave that part out. Leave that part out. Leave that part out. Leave that name out. Leave that out. Leave that out. Leave that out. We'll cut it back a little bit here. We'll redact the book, cut it down to size. So when you look at that rod, I think that rod was in the hands of all of the kings. So when you look at Matthew 1, you begin with David, right? Because he is in the line of Judah, in the line of Jesse, in the house of Perez, in the line of Judah. And it goes to David and then to Solomon and then to Rehoboam. And it comes down through all the kings of Judea, Yahud. It comes down to all of those kings until you get to Yekoniyahu. Now, Yekoniyahu has the rod of Aharon, and Nebuchadnezzar takes him captivity into Babylon. So there's other kings that follow Yekoniyahu, but none of them have the rod.
Right.
You know, there's Joachim, there's Zedekiah, but none of those kings have the rod. Jeconiah, who is still living, Jeconiah, still living in Babylon. These other kings are temporary pro tems, you might call them. They're pro tem. They're over there just kind of filling in the slot while the real king is in exile in Babylon. And once Zedekiah is killed, that rod goes from Yekoniah to Shealtiel, and then from Shealtiel to Zerubbabel, and then down through that list in Matthew 1. They're right there in Matthew 1. You go right down that list. Boom, 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 until you come to Joseph, the father of Miriam, who I believe was Joseph of Arimathea, who had the rod of Aharon in his hand. And so this rod of Aharon is going to end up where? In Avalon. And so what is the capability of the rod of Aharon, Jesse? In the hands of Aaron, it becomes a dragon.
Yeah.
And it is the symbol of the state of Wales.
Yes, it is. I want to ask you this, Stephen, both for the rod of Aaron and for the rod of Moses. My understanding from the brief research I'm starting to study, is when Adam and Eve were abandoned, with them they took a branch from one of the trees. I think it's the, if you can clarify which tree that is. And that rod was crafted, was made from the tree of good and evil, I believe. Is that correct?
I don't think it came from the tree of good and evil, Jesse. I don't know.
Did it come from the other tree?
Yeah, I don't know if it came from the tree of life or not. It may have come from the tree of life.
Right.
I'm not sure. I don't recall exactly what Zen's research shows on that.
It's sort of indicating that it was crafted, it was created. When they were abandoned, they took from that a big branch, and from that branch, that became the rod for Moshe, for Moses, in my understanding. But I've only just got into the beginning of looking at that. But that, that intrigues me. And then also that they weren't just abandoned, they were abandoned with garments. One that got through to Nimrod. And that's why Nimrod was the person that he was, because when he wore it, even the birds revered him, everything revered him. And that's where he got his powers from. And then there's a connection to Joseph with that coat of many colors that I'm still trying to work out. But these things really intrigue and interest me. And then, of course, this rod, when Yahushua returns, he shall be holding that rod and we will see his name on his thigh. It's things like that. So I'm all over the place trying to put the chronology and an understanding and better understanding together.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the whole thing is absolutely fascinating with the rod. And I just want to make sure that we, that you have to keep in mind that it's easy to cast power in rod or to cast power in the skins and so forth. But truly the power belongs in the Ruach HaKodesh, and it belongs in the mystery of Yah. And so, Yah can do all of these things. It's not just, the pagans seek after, these artifacts. Oh, I have to have the Ark of the Covenant. Oh, I have to have the rod. And you recall what happened to the Nazis when they found the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones, right? They all fried there.
Yeah.
Kind of an important teaching, but it is true.
Yeah, not to put importance on it for the future or for us now, but just an understanding of that. Because again, so much of this has been hidden. And now while we're wanting to run that race and find these things out. So much of what you introduced, what was brought on Monday with both you and Zen, is new concepts. So there is a lot to find out. And I find it absolutely prevalent because it really has a lot to do with now what we're facing and where we're going through. It's not something that you just look at it from a context of history, how it was, because it affects you now also, and even in the future. And it's just understanding that makes you stronger in your understanding of the word.
When we talk about this, one of the things about Genesis 6:4 that is so interesting, so curious, it's talking about the Beni Elohim. Okay. It's talking about the Beni Elohim, that these sons of Elohim would come to have relations with human women, right? There were nephilim in the earth in those days, and the Beni Elohim, the sons of Elohim, came to have relations with human women. Now, and these were, they were, you could call them men of time out of mind, men from time out of mind. Well, what's time out of mind? Well, time out of mind would be the time that precedes the creation of Adam. That's the time out of mind. So who are these Beni Elohim? So I think there was two different falls. You had the fall of the Beni Elohim, who were just in open rebellion to Yah. And because they were in open rebellion to Yah, they get exiled on the face of the earth. But death has not come to them. So when mankind is created, it's quite specific. If you eat from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, you will die. So now, whereas the Beni Elohim did not have death in their vocabulary, mankind does have death in his vocabulary. Because now this is evidenced in the book of Jude, which talks about how the angels will be locked up in chains, right? This is what Jude talks about. Where did he get that idea? He got it from the book of Hanok. And Hanok says that these angels, not angels, but these watchers were going to be cast into prison until the last day. That is to say, they didn't die in the flood. Very important. They did not die in the flood. They're cast into prison until the last day, until the consummation. So this is very interesting because you would think they would die. No, well, they didn't die because they didn't have that curse. They didn't have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to fall like Adam did. Adam had it and fell. And so mankind has a different fate than the Beni Elohim. But nonetheless, the Beni Elohim come to the women and go, we want a part of whatever destiny they have. We want a part of that. And so they come and they have a part of it. Okay, so you're talking about a group of people that somehow lived through the catastrophe which preceded the creation of Adam. We don't know what that catastrophe was. We don't know how bad. But I mean, I think that you can see that there is a ton of evidence that the oceans used to be substantially lower than they are now. And I've mentioned this before. We talk about it up here in Alaska, that little Diomede Island has a village that's 150 feet below sea level. The ancient village site was 150 feet below sea level. You're not going to, the villagers didn't go down there and build an underwater village. Yeah. The ocean was clearly 150 feet lower than it is today. Those are just hard facts. And so you can see that if the ocean was much, much lower, then you could expect to see ruins that are underwater. And you see them off the coast of Bermuda. You see ruins that are underwater, giant stones that are laid down there. There's a huge stairway off the coast of Japan that's underwater. There were areas of Japan that were much larger. Indonesia was a subcontinent. Africa was attached to Europe. Europe was attached to Britain. All of these things because the water was so much lower. Probably they were lower. There's a couple of possibilities. One, there wasn't a lot of ocean on the earth at that time, as is described in Scripture. There wasn't a lot of ocean. And that something happened that caused the heavens to pour rain down upon the earth. One theory is that there was an ice ring around the earth, a massive ice ring, like the ring around Saturn. There was a massive ice ring around Earth, and that there was a cataclysm in the heavens, like something hit a planet that was between Mars and Jupiter, breaking the planet apart, and it became asteroids. And when that happened, something collided with the ring around Earth, and that ring collapsed onto the Earth, and coming through the atmosphere, the vast majority of it melted. But a lot of it didn't. When snow comes down, it starts out, it's going to come down and it's going to melt until the atmosphere gets cool enough where it doesn't melt anymore. And this is the case here. The ice ring is collapsing. There's a lot of it's melting, and then it doesn't melt anymore. And it begins to accumulate as ice, both on the North Pole and on the South Pole. And as it begins to accumulate, who knows how big that ice cap was? They speculate that you can tell by the geology of North America that it covered most of Canada and most of Alaska in a gigantic ice cap, and it covered a lot of Northern Europe in an ice cap.
Mhm.
So because there were massive ice caps on the Earth, there was a lot less water, and the oceans were a lot lower. And with the oceans being a lot lower, there was a different turf on the world. There was a different geography.
Right. Mm. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because this is also hidden. So, but you can understand it more and more now. You can give credence to it, all the way back to what you were saying earlier on about the electricity, because that's Tartaria, isn't it? And you just look at the buildings now, the Kremlin, beautiful. The storm's just come back. Our daughter from Italy and Spain, the buildings there, you can see the spirals. That's the electricity that you were talking about. All these things. What I'm trying to say, Stephen, is, they're actually very, very plausible. You can see links, and you've got to question it. You've got to investigate. You've got to dig further into it, because there's so much more. What I did want to ask you, for those who don't understand, I think viewers watching right now will understand, but can you give a distinction between the Ben Elohim and Nephilim and Nephilim? So if
Yeah,
you
sure.
can explain the three differences. I'm just getting confused now between, there's two terminologies, isn't there?
I know what you're talking about. Sure. You have, and a lot of this can be seen in Numbers 13:33. Numbers 13:33, Bamidbar 13:33, talking about the sons of Anak and distinguishing between Nephilim and Nephilim.
Mhm.
Okay. And
Yeah.
there's two different groups, because the Nephilim are the fallen. These are the ones who fell. The Nephilim are their children, which they call giants and so on and so forth. But the Beni Elohim may be somebody entirely different. Now, there's only
Right.
three passages in the Old Testament that talk about the Beni Elohim: Genesis 6:4, Job 1:6, and Job 2:1. And in Job 1:6 and Job 2:1, you're talking about that the Beni Elohim appear before Yah, and Satan is with them. And Yah asks Satan, "Where have you been?" "Oh, walking to and fro and back and forth over the face of the earth," which is exactly where the Beni Elohim were. So the Beni Elohim are something very interesting, because these are children that appear to have interdimensional access to heaven. So unlike mankind is locked in this dimension, but these beings obviously can appear before Yah in heaven and can appear on the earth. So they appear to be interdimensional beings, which means they would have like shape-shifting capability. People ask, well, how can they possibly have sex with women? Because angels can't have sex. These weren't necessarily angels. These were Beni Elohim, made in the image and the likeness of Elohim. That's what how Genesis 1 describes it. Okay, so the Beni Elohim are different than the Nephilim. The Nephilim come from the fallen ones, the fallen angels who were kicked out, who were at war with Yah. These fallen angels were Nephilim, and they were on the earth at that time. They were on the earth at the time that these Beni Elohim did this transaction. And they were probably supposed to watch over this whole deal. But when you see the Shemiyats and this whole crowd, this group of people, who were they? What does watcher mean? Now, watcher is a very interesting word, because it only appears in the book of Daniel unless you deal with the books that you find in the Sefer. Watcher, the only place you find the word watcher is in Daniel. But you can look up watcher and you'll find out that it's an Aramaic word, which is ear in the Aramaic and in the Hebrew. And it doesn't just mean watcher. In fact, watcher is kind of down the list. It means really ancient master. Ancient master. The old wise guys. See, watcher is a term that was developed by the English translators. Well, let's use the word watcher.
Okay.
But this is actually ancient masters. And so when you see the ancient masters, who were these ancient masters? These were the Beni Elohim, who did not have the fall of man that would take their life. They're going to live until the consummation. That's what Enoch says. They're going to live to the consummation. Mm-hmm. And so here they are wandering the earth because they were not killed in the flood. And so even Genesis 6 says they were on the earth and after. They were on the earth before the flood and after the flood. How? Because the flood didn't kill them. So here you have these Beni Elohim. Now, the Nephilim and the Nephilim, fallen ones, Nephilim and their offspring, this is a different group. And Anak is described there in Numbers 13:33, who has no parent. Anak just appears out of nowhere. A-N-A-Q, Anak. Hey, I'm here. Well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm having children. What kind of children? Nephilim, giants. And so we see that with the Nephilim, you see giants, you see Raphaim, you see, Raphaim is another word for him. Eliud is another word for him. Giants is another word for him. And they were not just giant human beings. They were also giant animals, like the Tyrannosaurus Rex. This is what the book of Giants describes. So these giants, on the other hand, and this is what we're going to talk about on Thursday, because there was a giant in Britain when Brutus or British shows up around 1140 BC. He gets to the British Isles and is confronted by a giant whose name is Gog Magog.
Really?
Yes, really. And
Okay.
so anyway, so we're seeing a bunch of different stuff here, Jesse. We see a bunch of different stuff. And so again, we're not looking for stuff that is like, gee, let's pull stuff out of extra scripture books to confirm everything. We're finding this in the scripture with a careful read. Well, look, that's anomalous. That's anomalous. What does that mean? How can that make sense when you compare it with that? Written right there in the Tanakh, written right there in the Torah. It's written right there. How do you justify that when you're comparing that? And so we look and we see that there is something new going on. And I got to tell you that when the Sefer came out and said, well, look, here's what we're doing. We're transliterating the names as we find them from the Hebrew. As soon as we did that, people were like, boom, wait a minute. That's telling a different narrative than what my church told me. Well, the churches, look, whenever you have somebody saying, like Rome, you read what I tell you to read, and you read it the way I want you to read it, and you understand it the way we understand it, or we're going to burn you at the stake.
Yeah.
Well, that makes for what we call a closed mind.
Yes, absolutely. And it's hurtful. It's painful sometimes, isn't it? How it affects you, the criticism. I did a program 2 weeks ago, and that was with Dr. Madej. And one person, their criticism, instead of looking at the facts that was being presented, was neither of them have said the word Jesus, but everything was about Yahusha in what we spoke. But they wanted to hear that word Jesus because it went against everything that they've heard. And that can offend, that can hurt. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. I do want to ask you this because you've broken it down so well. I'm actually going to have to write and all these different names you gave such great detail to. When Eve was beguiled by the serpent, it was in serpent form. It wasn't as man or anything like that. Can you give more credence to that? Because Cain came out human, yet it was there's a different word for the form that he deceived her in. That's what I'm trying to get at. So you've just explained these other forms here. Can you give some depth to that?
Well, there are two schools of thought. One school is that Satan beguiled Eve by defrauding her and by nothing else, that there was no sex between them. Okay. However, this does not mean that there was not a DNA transfer that took place. Okay. Now, when you talk about the serpent at the time obviously did not walk on his belly because that was part of the curse that would come later. Yeah. So the serpent was something else. Now, there are many people who believe that the serpent seed is with us even today, that there are people that have a reptilian background.
Yeah.
Now, it's they're very, very human, except that every now and then you see somebody with a cloven foot or with scales on their leg or something like this, right? Or reptilian eyes. But the truth is that, I shouldn't say the truth. What our understanding is that there is, with the reptilian serpent, with the reptilian seed, there's a third strand of DNA. What knowledge of good and evil? It is a third strand of DNA. It's what we call the triple helix. Now, the triple helix is what is involved now, what we see the whole world going to. You're going to be cured with a triple helix. You're going to have to adapt to the triple helix. You need to be a cyborg who is marked with the triple helix. You need to have the mark of the triple helix. You need to have the triple helix in your system. You need to be a triple helix individual. And by the way, this is now coming very quickly. They're about to pass new rules at the federal level in the United States, prohibiting all federal benefits from people who are not jabbed.
Yes. Yeah. That's very true.
Isn't that interesting enough? Again, they're weaponizing everything that they have in their arsenal. They're weaponizing against the people of America. And by doing so, they completely destroy their credibility. They have no legitimate right to govern, and they have no legitimate claim of stewardship over the resources of the American people. That's just the facts. Here's where they're going, because they're deranged individuals who have been given over to a great delusions. They're going to burn in the later.
Yeah.
So, but going back to this, when we talk about this triple helix, we see the evidence of this coming out of the book of genetics called Genesis. Genetics. They call it genetics instead of Genesis. They call it Genesis instead of genetics. Genetics. Okay, and then how about, and what's the Toldot? The generations. This is the story of the generations of Noah. This is the story of the generations of Abraham. This is the story of the generations of Yasharel. The Toldot, right? The DNA. And then when you get to the book of Revelation, what are you dealing with? You're dealing with the DNA story. What's the DNA story? They will have the number 144,000. That is to say 72,000 in the descending helix of the DNA and 72,000 in the ascending helix of DNA, for a total of 144,000 genes in your DNA, a double helix. But with the triple helix, you go to 216,000, which is, of course, the product of multiplying, the quotient of multiplying 6 times t times 600, and it gives you 216,000. So the triple helix is definitely the mark of the beast. The triple helix was what was taught at the garden. The triple helix was what transformed the seed of Cain to who he was. The triple helix is what takes place when you transfer your child to Molech. Do not give your child over to Molech. How do you do that? By accepting whatever methodology they had at the time, and I don't know what it was, but they had a methodology by which that child would take on a third strand of DNA.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. Well, what's so fascinating is you come out of this and you're probed for more thought, more investigation, more unanswered facts. You get to a point that you become so zealous that you just want to know. And it's good to be in that position because it makes you more authentic in your walk, in your faith, and to be able to stand up, resist and fight and to defend. You don't care after a while. You'll just stick to those divisions and the convictions, not divisions, and run with it. And that's all about coming out of Babylon as well and just standing strong, so that's
it's
wonderful.
Really true. It's really true. And, the thing is, what I have found is that, when we got to exploring scripture at this level, we start looking at, what do you think that says right there? Let's open up those gold pages where the gold leaf is still stuck together, that you never read at church. Let's peel that apart and see what it says. And then you're in there, you look and you go, oh, look at this. Wait a minute. Look at that. And we look like when we came on Numbers 13:33 and we saw nephilim distinguished from nephilim in the text in the Hebrew. I mean, we were bouncing off the wall. And I showed Stephen Ben Noon in Oregon. I said, Stephen, put that slide back up. I want to show you this in this particular passage. Look, do you see nephilim and nephilim? Oh, yeah, boom. And it totally confirmed the argument he was trying to make because it's there in the original Hebrew. Right there. Yeah. It's right there, right? And so when we saw this stuff, I mean, it's just stuff on stuff on stuff. You're looking and you're going, wait a minute, look at this. Boom. Oh, whoa. I had no idea that was it. And so then we discovered, it took us about a year until we discovered that, look, when you crack open that old section of the book, it's a gigantic treasure chest. And you're going along, and it's like, boom, wow. Did you know it said that? I had no idea that was there. And, it's flabbergasting. And as a result, we got excited. And we were so excited. I mean, our Thursday night Bible study was just like, we were just bouncing off the ceiling for 2 years. I mean, it was the greatest night of the week. There was no question about it. It was just like, this is going to be fantastic. This is it. This is it. We're just going to learn so much. And it was just mind boggling. All of a sudden, we just went from 0 to 120 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And in doing so, and once you do this, you come to discover, look, these scriptures contain the whole of the mystery.
Yes.
They contain the mystery of the history of mankind. They contain the mystery of what happened, what's going on right now, what will happen. It contains the mystery of Yah. It has the teaching about everything you need to know. And at the bottom line, the difference is you can lead a completely material, meaningless life. Gee, I got a lot of junk. Good. What are you going to do when you die? Well, my kids are going to have an auction and they're bringing in a state liquidator and they'll sell it all and then they'll get all the money so they can buy a lot of junk. Well, I've got a big house. How big is it? We need a ride vacuum cleaner to clean it. That's how big it is. And there's more to life than a big house and a new car. There's a boat. There's a plane. There's a lot. There's a lot of material junk you can have. And at the end, you have all this material junk. It doesn't talk back to you. It never gives you a hug. It doesn't love you. It's not in fellowship with you. It's just something lying around. And then you die. You're cremated, and that's the end of it. Dust in the wind. That was it. Compare that to Yah's world. Compare that to Yah's world.
Yeah.
You're alive in the eternal kingdom right now. You're alive in the eternal kingdom right now. Your Ruach, once your Ruach knows of the Father and the Son whom he sent, your Ruach is alive in eternity right now. And you have a great cloud of witnesses with whom you can stand among and say to them, Hallelujah.
Beautiful.
Hallelujah. The King of Glory, Melech HaKavod, right? The King of Glory, King of all. So we thanks and praise that he has brought us life and life more abundantly and life beauty and life that is full of life and living color and all the things that are the glory of Yah, not the wrath of Yah, not the judgment of Yah, but the glory of Yah, the mercy of Yah, the compassion of Yah, the beauty of Yah, the strength of Yah, the power of Yah. These things that are brought to us in his word. What's wrong with that?
We have to focus on that also. We have to. It's our duty. And that's our worship, isn't it? Otherwise, you get involved just in the conspiracy or the hard side of it. So you bring balance, and that's what he expects. That's so important. You know what I'm excited about? Because say going on for the next few weeks, what I see is a little bit of a pattern. You were saying in this talk about what's happening in America and where it's going regarding the snake bite and proof of vaccine and things like that. Here in the UK today, it's just passed now, we're into the 15th, but it was leaked, but probably done purposely on the government website, that they are looking for someone for a high-paid, salarized position to be a chief vaccination officer for new lockdowns that will be coming on globally, as well as the new vaccine, which will be mandatory. So when you said what you did, that reminded me, okay, so this is the next course of what is happening. And where we're going from now to when you go to South Africa, I can see specific things that we'll be addressing like we have today, and it will be a continuation of that, because you're not just looking at vestures and rods. It opens up so much more that is so relevant. But then just in the UK alone, smart cities, there's more now than just Oxford. It started there, but there's at least 5 other plus places, key cities that are now in with these smart streets and this new introduction. Even my own parents are saying they can't park their car outside their own door very soon. They have to walk from a certain distance to get to their house, and their car has to be up there. So this is all that control and things like that that we are addressing and that we are seeing. But other than that, so we look at the glory, we look how we still worship and how we still stand strong despite all these things. The other thing that I see that you are meeting a need very, very clearly is people in different globally are asking about this common law and the law that other nations aren't affected necessarily with common law, like the Netherlands and so on. But it's something where we have to understand, where we now begin to see what we can do to bring back the word, the 10 Devarim, and live by that, and get those parts out. You've done it, Stephen. You came out of law. I know other people that have come out of their alphabets to their name so that they can be more independent and say, you don't own me anymore, I renounce you, that type of thing. You know, maybe then the remnant, we're starting to do what we are called to, even if we are few and far between, until his return. And, you know, when you go to South Africa, the dynamic there is completely different. Shane and I spent, I think, 4 months in a row in South Africa, and you've got apartheid there. There's still things, even after all these years later, that are still as a result of an apartheid. So the mission that you have there into a Torah community, one, it's going to be beautiful, but the dynamics is probably something that you haven't experienced there before. There's still a segregation, but then there's a unity when it comes to the love of Yah and worship. When we went, it was many years, well, 20 years ago. And then I could not understand how so many believers who had turned away from Hinduism had now become Christian believers in churches. And in fact, it blew my mind, because it wasn't the Afrikaans or the white people, Caucasian people who were making the churches grow. It was these ex-Hindu people that had turned to Yah, to Yahusha, and worshipping him. And I'm sure that dynamic is still there. And it would have to be within the Torah community for the Torah observant. So then you're going, what I'm trying to focus is on, you're dealing with so many different spiritual dynamics. And it's just exciting to see where you're going. It's thrilling to see where you're going. It's humbling, because again, it shows us we have to be there and accountable to Yah and the Ruach HaKodesh to lead us all the time. It's not a work of the flesh, but just saying, here I am, send me, mold me, change me, take away what's in me that needs to be taken away, and use me where I am, as I am. I give you myself. And I see from this juncture to then, that it's very instrumental for you, because it's not just Sefer Stephen Pidgeon Ministries, it's inclusively touching so many, you know. And we've had this meeting that's come out today, which was not planned, and I'm just feeling that insurgence in my spirit that even this was part of that. It's to a bigger picture. You talked about jigsaw and things being hidden and they have to be unearthed. I can see the practicality of it, if I've made sense to you. I hope I have.
You have, yeah. And the jigsaw, I'll tell you, it is very important, because, you know, when we look at where we are now, you know, first of all, if you're a human being, you have a destiny with Yah. You do. And, you know, you've got to determine what that's going to be. He desires that all would be saved and that none would be lost. And so this is a destiny that all have to consider. And as you're considering that, you know, the idea of what the world, and I can sit and criticize the world and say, oh, that guy was teaching you such dumb doctrine. Hey, look, I was teaching dumb doctrine myself. What are we talking about? So I'm not criticizing anybody. What I'm trying to show, though, is that there is a robust understanding of Yah, and you want to be part of that. You don't want to be left back in some 1990s understanding of Scripture, when they intentionally shortchanged you with a redacted, modified, neutralized, dumbed down set of scriptures, so that you could not see the truth of it.
Yeah.
And when you understand the full truth, it's not going to affect or take away from your belief and your love in the Messiah. It will not do that. It's not going to take away from that. In fact, I get criticized all the time. Oh, you trying to say that Yahusha is this? Well, that's heresy. Well, you know, only to people who disagree with the Gospel of John is it heresy. But we've taken a very strong stance, and in that strong stance, it's not going to diminish your faith one little bit to understand the rest of the story.
Yeah,
it's not, and when you understand the rest of the story, you know where you lose faith. You lose faith in Constantine. You lose faith in the Pope.
yes.
You lose faith in that evangelical leader. You lose faith in that worship pastor. You lose faith in the modeled religious church. You lose faith in the edifice. You lose faith in the gargantuan building. You lose faith in let's be in a big stadium and worship together. You lose faith in that.
Yeah.
And you gain the faith, the true faith, the narrow path, which is between a wall of fire and a sea of troubles. and
Mm.
a strong wind blowing on it. You know, it's a narrow path, and troubled is he who walks on it. This is a gospel teaching.
Yeah. Mm.
But if you're not on that troubled path, and it's only wide enough for the one of you, if you're not on that path, you're not on the path. You're on the way, and you're on the broad way. You know, you're on the broad way to damnation. You're not on the
Yeah.
narrow path to salvation. And that
Yeah.
narrow path doesn't include a building. It doesn't include a pipe organ. It doesn't include a weekly tithe. It doesn't include any of that stuff. It
Yeah.
includes reverence. It includes understanding. It includes knowing the name.
Yes. Yes. Mm. So beautifully put, Stephen. What really, really beautifully put. It just ignites passion and a fire in you. It's a good way to end. I don't want to end, but this was an impromptu program, and so I'm very mindful of your time and our viewers' time. So it's really been a wonderful meeting here today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. You have just got blown my mind even more. I have so much to go and investigate and come back and probably do programs like this with you again, where we can just go into it, because it's just been so wonderful. You know, there's so much in my head now I'm forgetting to ask you, and when we end, I should have asked this and that, but we can do that again. I want to thank you for investing in this today, investing into the viewers and the lives that this is going to touch outside of those that are watching. I know it's the beginning of something, so we just humble ourselves and say, yeah, use us and use this and touch people's lives, because it is your name and your power that we proclaim and that we go before. And like I started the previous program from Proverbs, it is the glory of Yah to conceal a matter, but it is the duty of kings to search out a matter. Everything that you have heard today and in the last 10 minutes that Stephen so poignantly put together is our duty, that missing jigsaw. It makes us stronger in our faith. And you know what? We will throw away, we won't even entertain those entities that once tried to bind us. And that is what really blesses me to know, that we can sharpen one another and walk this journey together, and that we come together at times like this, and we are in praise, we are in worship, but we are learning and we are edifying Yah and bringing his word to be refining fire in our lives, that it changes us and makes us go forward with fuel to the next step. So we want to bless you and thank you for joining us today. Matthew, behind the scenes, thank you for being there so late. Stephen, thank you. You know, we just bless everyone here. You take care, everyone, and we will see you. The next one is Thursday now on the dig. So looking forward to that, because that is Gog and Magog. Totally different from how you presented it this time last year, where everyone was looking towards Russia with Ukraine, the things starting up. So I'm really looking forward to what has changed. And now I'm going to be investigating what the little that you gave us for Thursday into the Brighteon. So, you know, so much research. It's really good when it comes and it brings about the word alive. Anyway, guys, you take care. Stay blessed. Bye-bye.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Two people laughed. Two people cried. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Ever seen a blind man cross the road, trying to make the other side, baby? Ever seen a young girl growing old, trying to make herself a bride? So what becomes of you, my love?
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Pray that he's still out there. Somewhere.